How did James's death fulfill what Jesus said in Mark 10:39? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Acts on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Acts chapter 12, verses 1 to 10, but before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Acts chapter 12, verse 1, but if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Acts chapter 12, beginning at verse 1. Now about that time Herod the king stretched out his hands to harass some from the church. Then he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to seize Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread. So when he had arrested him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers to keep him, intending to bring him before the people after Passover. Peter was therefore kept in prison, but constant prayer was offered to God for him by the church. And when Herod was about to bring him out, that night Peter was sleeping, bound with 2 chains between 2 soldiers, and the guards before the door were keeping the prison. Now behold, an angel of the Lord stood by him, and a light shone in the prison. And he struck Peter on the side, and raised him up, saying, Arise quickly. And his chains fell off his hands. Then the angel said to him, Gird yourself and tie on your sandals. And so he did. And he said to him, Put on your garment and follow me. So he went out and followed him, and did not know that what was done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. When they were past the first and the second guard posts, they came to the iron gate that leads to the city, which opened to them of its own accord. And they went out and went down one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. At the end of chapter 11, we learned that there was going to be a great famine that would affect the whole world, but would affect Judea hard. The prophecy by Agabus would have occurred before the famine began, but we identified the famine with one that occurred in 44 AD during the reign of Claudius Caesar, just as Luke says. That time period would make sense, for here in chapter 12, based on the events later on in the chapter, we know that we're currently in about 44 AD. Luke tells us in verse 1 that at that time Herod stretched out his hand to harass some of the church. Now it is easy for us to assume that every time we see the name Herod, we're talking about the same person, but that assumption would be false. The Herod who was alive when Jesus was born was Herod the Great. The Herod who is found later in the Gospels when Jesus was preaching was Herod the Tetrarch, or Herod Antipas. The Herod spoken of here in Acts 12 is not Herod the Tetrarch, for he died in exile in 39 AD. No, the Herod we're talking about here is Herod Agrippa I, grandson of Herod the Great. Agrippa I's father was Aristobulus IV, a man who was executed by Herod the Great in about 7 BC because Herod believed that Aristobulus was a threat to the throne. Getting back to Acts 12, part of this harassment of the church involved the execution of James, the brother of John, by the sword. That would mean that James was the first apostle of Jesus to be executed for the faith. The killing of James shouldn't surprise us, though, for not only did all of the apostles suffer through great persecution, but Jesus specifically told James and John that they would suffer greatly for his name. Back in Mark 10, verses 35 to 40, we read, Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? They said, Grant us that we may sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left, in your glory. But Jesus said to them, You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? They said to him, We are able. So Jesus said to them, You will indeed drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism I am baptized with, you will be baptized. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared. Now note that passage doesn't say that James would be executed, but it does say that he would be baptized with the baptism that Jesus went through, which included suffering and, yes, death. So what happened to James here is a fulfillment of Jesus' words. But the persecution of Herod didn't stop there, for once he saw that the execution of James pleased the Jews, probably meaning the Jewish religious elite, he seized Peter also. He didn't kill him immediately, though, because it was the days of unleavened bread, meaning that it was Passover time. Now, it didn't stop the Jews from killing Jesus during this same feast more than a decade earlier, but it did stop Herod here in Acts 12. Before moving on, if you're reading the King James Version, verse 4 says that Herod was intending to bring Peter out after Easter. Easter today, in many Christian religious circles, is a time that commemorated the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. However, we don't read of the Church of the New Testament ever having special feast days in memory of Jesus' death. We read of them partaking of the Lord's Supper in remembrance of Jesus' death year-round on Sunday. In fact, it wasn't until the mid-2nd century that early observances of what would become Easter are recorded. If early Christians didn't celebrate Easter as a special feast day, why then does the King James Version mention it in Acts 12? Because we need to remember that the King James Version is an English translation. Luke didn't write the King James Version, for he wrote in the Koine Greek, not English. In the Greek, verse 4 uses the word Pascha, which is properly translated as Passover. The reason the King James Version translates this as Easter is because by the time the King James Version is translated, Easter is already a well-established feast among the apostate church. And so, since this is after Jesus' death, the bias of the translators shines through when they translate Passover as Easter. All other English translations correct this mistake, including the New King James Version, which we read earlier. With the Passover reprieve, though, it allowed the church to constantly be praying for Peter and his safety. Whether they had prayed for James or not, we don't know, but what we do know is that they knew Peter's life was endangered, and that God, if it was his will, could rectify the situation. And so they prayed. And God answered those prayers with a yes, for the night before Peter was to be brought out by Herod, while Peter was sleeping, bound with 2 chains between 2 soldiers, an angel stood by Peter, and a light shone around the prison. The angel woke Peter up, told him to gird himself up, which means to stand up, tie his sandals and put on his garments, and follow the angel. Peter did what the angel told him, though he didn't know if what was happening was real or whether he was seeing a vision, as had happened to Peter in chapter 10. The angel led Peter out of the prison and to the iron gates that led to the city. The gate opened by itself, a miracle from God, allowing the angel to lead Peter into the city. Once in the city, though, the angel departed. All of this was done by a miracle, for the guards that kept Peter secured and the guards at the prison did not know anything was happening. We'll continue with this story, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Acts chapter 12, verses 11 to 19, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.